Today we're excited to have John Mackey, the founder and CEO of Whole Foods, for the second time on the Talks at Google stage. Last time John was here, he was talking about his book, Conscious Capitalism, which is about how businesses can be profitable but also serve a higher purpose. I think that's something we can all relate to here at Google. Today, however, John's here to talk about his latest book, The Whole Foods Diet, which is about how a plant-based lifestyle can help us live longer and live well. So, can we have a big round of applause for John Mackey?
I'm excited about this book. I'm very proud of it. It kind of sums up my 39 years of healthy living experiments and kind of what I've learned. I wrote it with, how many of you saw the film Forks Over Knives? Anybody see those films? And the two doctors that were the two young doctors in that film, Alona Poldy and Matt Letterman, they work for Whole Foods. And so they are my co-authors in the book because I'm a grocer, not a doctor. It's so good when somebody asks me those tough medical questions to say, I'm not a doctor, but this is what Matt and Alona say. So this presentation I'm about to make, I got to tell you, I'm looking at a very young audience. You're all bulletproof still. But it's kind of depressing, the statistics I'm going to put forth. Also, I'm looking at a very young, but also looks like a very healthy and health-conscious audience. So some of this will, well, the numbers are true, even if they don't apply to you or your friends. So we're an incredibly unhealthy nation, and most people don't realize how unhealthy America is, but by most world health indicators, we do not score very highly. And you can see here that what's the leading causes of death in the United States. Heart disease is still the leading killer. Cancer has just about caught it. But if you add stroke into the cardiovascular category along with heart disease is still very far ahead. Interestingly enough, medical care itself is the third leading cause of death in our country. And then the diseases that would kill us about 100 years ago, or the turn of the, early 1900s, were the infectious diseases. And those have largely been wiped out. I mean, they're not the same kind of killers they were. If you went back 100 years ago, they were dying from tuberculosis, and they were dying from, they didn't have any antibiotics, so they get infections and they'd get blood poisoning and die off. So our problem now is that the things that are killing us are lifestyle diseases, dietary lifestyle diseases primarily. And medical care being the third leading cause of death is not something that doctors want to tell people, but adverse drug effects. Far more people die from prescription drugs in America than die from illegal drugs, I mean, by many factors every year. And primarily because of the interactions of these different drugs that people are taking, combined with the type of infections people get when they go into hospitals. So those two together are the lion's share, and plus just stupid mistakes that hospitals make. That's the third leading leading cause of death for medical care. Here are the grim statistics. We're now up to 71% of all adults in this country are overweight, 71%. And 38% of adults are now obese. The thing is, the trend lines have still not leveled off. They're continuing to steadily climb. And that's now estimated, obesity is now estimated to cost our nation about $190 billion a year. So it's gone from 15% obesity in the US back in 1971 to now it's about 38%, as a statistic I gave before. So it's more than doubled in the last 40 years. And it's not just a problem in the United States, it's a problem across the world. Again, this does not look like it did before I turned it over here. But you can see the blue represents where these countries were in obesity back in 1980, and you can see what's happened since 2008. And this is primarily, we've begun to export our dietary patterns of eating that we do in the United States across the world. And the result is a crisis in obesity. And the United States is the fattest country, but you will see that the UK, Mexico, and South Africa are close behind. And the trend lines show that Mexico will probably pass up the United States sometime in the next decade or so for the fattest country in the world, a dubious honor. This is probably the most disturbing, is what's happening to children. 17% of the children alive today between the ages of 2 and 19 are now already obese, not just overweight, but obese. And 70% of children that are 12 years of age already show signs of heart disease at age 12. And already 19% are showing chronic, dietary-related chronic disease conditions. How's it happened? Oh, I know what's happened. We've eaten more. We have more calories. And this is the truth that's not spoken. We eat per capita 25% more calories than we did 40 years ago. So we're eating more calorie-dense foods. And that's why we're fatter. It's not rocket science. We are simply eating the wrong kinds of foods, and we're eating a lot many more calories. So if you look at the different food groups that where we've increased, so sugar is usually held out as a scapegoat, and I'm certainly not going to defend sugar. Sugar's not a healthy food. But it's usually held out, you have books, the Gary Taubes, and all the low-carb people are making sugar into the villain nutrient. And sugar did increase per capita in the last 40 years. It went up about 10% from where it was 40 years ago on a per capita basis. So sugar has increased. But by far, the biggest increases have been in three major categories. The first one, oils, vegetable oils. We're now eating about 67% more oil than we ate 40 years ago on a per capita basis. And that's, I blame the Mediterranean diet for that, because people became convinced that olive oil was a health food. And if you look at the history of the Mediterranean diet in the Mediterranean countries, what they were doing when they did the research, they discovered that, yes, the Mediterranean people down in Crete and in Sardinia and some of the Mediterranean countries that have these great health outcomes, they studied their diet and they found out they were eating a lot more fruits and vegetables, they were eating less meat, they were eating more beans, they were eating lots, they had their own gardens, they were eating lots more whole grains, and they ate a little more fish, they didn't eat so much meat, and they used olive oil instead of butter, and they drank red wine. But what was the takeaway that Americans got about the Mediterranean diet?
Olive oil.
Exactly. Olive oil and red wine. And arguably, the people were healthy not because of those two foods, but in spite of them. Meaning it was the fresh fruits and vegetables and whole grains and beans and fewer animal foods. Not to mention they were, people in Crete were walking like 9 miles every day. And yet, we drew the wrong conclusions from it. So oil was a huge cause of the weight gain. Also, refined flours. The number of donuts and bagels and croissants and just kind of white bread that has been consumed has gone way up in the last 40 years. And the final thing is dairy fats, particularly cheese. In 1915, the per capita consumption of cheese was 3 pounds a person a year in the US. Today, 100 years later, it's 34.5 pounds of cheese. So, that's 1,000%, more than 1,000% increase, 10x. And I don't eat any cheese at all. So somebody's probably eating about 69 pounds of cheese to make up the difference. And you probably know who you are. So here's the thing. Let's put this in a greater context. Let's put it in an evolutionary context. Being fat was not a problem that human beings have had for most of our evolutionary history. Quite the opposite. We were just trying to get enough calories to stay alive. It was about survival. When we were gatherers and hunters, there wasn't very much calorie-dense food available. People were foraging for fruits and vegetables, and maybe they can get some starchy tubers. This was before we had agriculture, that through hybridization and selective breeding we could increase the sweetness of fruit, increase the carbohydrates that might be in a root vegetable like a sweet potato or a squash or a potato. And so we just were eating massive quantities of food, very high fiber content, just to get enough calories. And when they could pull down a wild animal, wild game, then they'd get a rich source of concentrated protein and calories, although nothing like the kind of meat that people eat today, where you have corn-fed beef, and we've basically fattened up our livestock animals. So what this translates into is that we are evolutionary programmed, or evolutionary predisposition to crave calorie-dense foods. We like things that have a lot of calories in them. We like sugar, we like fat, we like white rice, we like ice cream, particularly like things that combine sugar and fat, like a nice dark chocolate candy bar, yum. Or we like oil. Oil is the most calorie-dense food you can eat. 1 tablespoon of oil has 120 calories. So now that we've become more affluent, we can get calorie-dense foods not on a feast day, not in a rare event. We can have it 3 times a day or more. And so we do. And as the rest of the world becomes more affluent, that same craving for calorie density stays in play. And so that's why the whole world's getting fat, because we can eat more animal foods, we can eat more ice cream, we can eat more oil, we can eat more sugar, and we are. And we're basically killing ourselves with our craving for calorie-dense foods. And so that translates into the thing most people aren't really conscious of, is food addictions. Food addictions are a really serious problem. And most people are addicts, but they don't know it until they try to quit. And then when you try to change your diet, you find that it's quite difficult. You can change it for a while, but then you tend to drift back to the old pattern because it's deeply set. Type 2 diabetes is almost towards pandemic, because we're now about 12% of people are identified as diabetic, but we have 35% of the population, or estimated 86 million people, are already pre-diabetic and on their way to being diabetic. So we're talking about, gosh, I mean, almost half of the adult population is either diabetic or pre-diabetic. And the complications of diabetes down the road are absolutely horrible. Look at what happens to people. I mean, they can go blind, they have to amputate their feet, they get hearing loss, they can get osteoporosis, they get Alzheimer's. It's a horrible disease that is, and it's a total, type 2 diabetes is totally a lifestyle disease. I'm going to talk about how you can reverse that disease fairly quickly by dietary changes. Heart disease, 1.5 million people a year die from a heart attack or stroke, and more than 2,200 will die each day, which is about how many people we lost on 9/11. And that is also a dietary disease. Heart disease is a disease no one ever should get. Unless you have some kind of genetic defect, it's completely something we do to ourselves through what we eat. Cancer scares the shit out of everybody. And there's nobody in this room that hasn't either had cancer or had somebody that they know and love get cancer. And more people are going to die from cancer in the next 27 months than everybody that we've ever had lost in a war since the founding of the Republic. And yeah, I'm going to argue that cancer is primarily also a dietary and lifestyle disease. Here you can see, if you look at the major risk factors for cancer, there's 2 overwhelming risk factors: what you eat and whether you smoke or not. The other ones, pollution, alcohol, radiation, and medications, they are risk factors. They are contributors, but they're relatively small. Somewhere between 65 and 90% of all cancers go back to these 2 primary causes: tobacco use and diet. So this pie chart represents what Americans currently eat. And the processed foods on this pie chart is equal to 54% of all the calories we consume. 54% of what Americans eat is junk food. Highly processed foods, sugar, oil, refined grains. We eat 32% of our calories from animal foods. So that's now 86%. Vegetables, fruits, nuts, beans, and whole grains, only 14% of our diets are from those foods. And I would argue, and we do argue in our book, that at least 90% of your calories should come from whole plant foods. And the solution is the whole foods diet. There you're going to have your animal foods. We're not arguing for a 100% vegan diet, but we're arguing for at least 90% plant-based and 90+%. But we're arguing for 100% real foods diet. If you really want to transform your health, you have to stop eating all the crap. And I'm sorry, but that's the facts. And if you do these two things together, so we say there's only two rules in the diet. Eat only whole foods, eat 90+% plant foods. Those are the two rules in the diet. It's simple to understand, but hard to do. So what aren't whole foods? All refined grains and flours, all concentrated sugars of all types, all artificial flavors, sweeteners, colorings, and preservatives, all food oils and concentrated fats like butter and lard, and almost all the processed foods that you find in the center of a supermarket. Here are some of our recognizable foods: Cokes and cakes and donuts and chocolate chip cookies and oil and white flour and white bread and white pasta. We are sugar junkies. We absolutely are. The typical American consumes 23 teaspoons of added sugar every single day. That's a 3-pound bag of sugar every 12 days. One 12-ounce soft drink is equal to 10 teaspoons of sugar. Here you can see the annual soft drink consumption. The good news is it peaked around, this didn't work out good either on the slide, but it peaked around about 2005 or something like that. We had a peak of our soft drink consumption. It's slowly gone down a little bit, but not because people are like drinking more water. It's been substituted things like Red Bull and Monster and energy drinks and sort of new age beverages that also have a lot of sugar in them. Also, like, here's a good boomer joke for the millennials. When I was a kid, they'd only had Cokes, and they were in these little 6-ounce bottles, which you might see in a museum someplace. And I mean, my parents knew what they were. They were just bottles of sugar, and so they wouldn't let us have those things. It was like, for a kid, it was like, oh my God, that's so good. Please, Mama, can I have a Coke? So there would be these little 6-ounce bottles, and my parents would dole them out if I was, a good boy, which meant I didn't get that many Cokes. But today, I mean, people they walk around, I see them, they walk around with these, 2-liter bottles of either Diet Coke or regular Coke, and that's what, I've met people that say, I just drink Coke. So you don't drink any water? No, I just drink Coke. It tastes a lot better. I already talked a little bit about oil, yeah, I'll pass on this one. I already made my case. Let's talk about the low-carb, high-animal food diets, and I'm going to make a case against it. So what most people don't realize is that the starch foods have been the major calorie source for humanity since we went out of the Paleolithic age. We're starch eaters. We've evolved to digest starches. We have enzymes in our mouth that are different than all the other primates because we can break down starches more effectively than any other species. And you can see that rice and rye and barley and oats and wheat and millet and sorghum and sweet potatoes, legumes, regular potatoes and corn, there's been no, I challenge you to name any major civilization in the history of this planet that didn't base the predominant amount of its calories on starches. There are none. You might find some weird tribe like the Maasai or the Inuits up in Greenland, but that's not a civilization. Those are people faced in a marginal life extreme position that are making do with what they find themselves at, but they don't have long life, and it's not, so it's kind of a bogus argument, but I hear it all the time. Starches have been the major calorie source. We're evolved to eat them, digest them, and they're our major fuel source. Meat consumption's increased 70% since 1940. And, but what's interesting, of course, it was kind of flat, and then we had the Depression, and it went down, and then it started to rocket up, around the beginning of World War II. And it just kept rocketing up until we got to about the year 2000. And now you can see it's actually declined almost 20%, or 15 or 20% from its peak. And that's despite the paleo and low-carb movement. But still, by any measurement, we're eating 32% of our calories from animal foods. And the per capita consumption of it, the increase is pretty phenomenal. Here's worldwide, and it's exploding. What's very interesting, this is based on tonnage. So actually pork, anybody have an idea why pork is the #1 animal food consumed in the world? Bingo, China. Bacon, I can see that people are thinking, bacon, I like bacon. No, China. China they eat so much pork there. But poultry, of course, is rapidly gaining. Poultry is the orange line, and it's just shooting up, and it's no doubt going to pass up pork sometime in the next 10 or 15 years. Wild fish is there now as #3, and it's leveled off, but if you add farm fish in, so the wild fish, you get it right up there at the very top if you add all fish together, farm fish and wild fish. But farm fish, you can see, has come from nowhere to rapidly growing wild fish because seafood is not sustainable any longer in the oceans. We're fishing out the oceans. And it's one of the great tragedies that people are not very conscious about is how we're emptying the oceans out because we're so good at fishing now. We have such amazing technology that the fish, they got no chance. We hunt them down and we load them up. Here's that chart. It came out. You can see, here it is. You can see the per capita increase over the last 100 years. So if we look at the studies, I'm going to make a bold claim here. I'm going to say all major studies show an increase in all-cause disease and death from low-carbohydrate diets. No studies, none, of high-carbohydrate diets show the similar effects. So here's a study 17 studies. This is sort of a meta-analysis of several different studies, observational studies, over 700,000 people. And low-carbohydrate diets are associated with a 31% increase in deaths from all causes. Here's a famous one the Harvard School of Public Health published in 2012. They followed 120,000 people between 22 and 28 years. And there was a 13% increase of dying for each 2 to 3 ounce serving per day of unprocessed red meat. So 2 to 3 ounces is not very much. So if you're eating like a big steak every day, your 13% increase is going to get magnified to well over 50% increase of risk for dying. And the processed red meats are now, the World Health Organization has classified processed red meats as a class 1 carcinogen, along with asbestos and tobacco. And of course, this has been heavily attacked by the meat industry, but they don't have any power over the World Health Organization. So it's pretty interesting. So particularly if you're consuming animal foods, I recommend staying away from the processed ones. By the way, bacon is one of those processed ones. Here's one, colon cancer. Now, over 1,000 studies confirm that red meat and processed red meat increases the risk of colon cancer. And plant-based diets consisting of whole grains, fruits, vegetables, and beans decreases the risk of colon cancer. As a result, the World Cancer Research and the American Institute for Cancer Research recommend eating primarily a plant-based diet. This study shows that when people are they're eating high amounts of animal protein, you can see their risk for cancer mortality goes up proportionately to how much animal foods they're eating. So a little bit, not too much risk, but as you eat more, the risk begins to escalate. Here's one about breast cancer. So women, as they get older, begin to worry more about breast cancer. Men worry about prostate cancer. So this is pretty interesting because this was 87 countries participated in this research by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. And they tracked animal product consumption, and it correlated very closely with 12 types of cancer, but with a lag of 15 to 25 years. So cancer is not something that shows up immediately. It takes a while for it to grow in our bodies. And usually, in fact, you can't even detect cancer in the body until it's been growing about 10 years. So, and when they say somebody's cancer-free, that simply means, doesn't mean they're cancer-free. It simply means the body, the instruments cannot detect it But it doesn't mean it's not there. It just means we can't see it. And here you can see the lag period on breast cancer. The more calories from animal foods that were consumed, the greater the incidence of breast cancer, with a lag period of about 20 years. How many people here have heard of the blue zones? A few of you. It's in our book. I think it's chapter 4 in the book. And the blue zones is the work of a guy named Dan Buettner, who got very interested about where are the longest lived peoples on the planet, and particularly ones we could document with birth certificates and actual, that we could actually measure. So he did the research, and he found 5 places on the planet that have extraordinarily long lives. And those 5 places are Okinawa, Japan, Sardinia, Italy, Icaria, Greece, Nicoya, Costa Rica, and of all places, Loma Linda, California. Seventh-day Adventists are concentrated in Loma Linda, California, which I'll get to in a minute. So what's very interesting is that if you look at what these people eat, they all, without exception, eat a variation of the whole foods diet. Except for a small subset of the Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda, none of them are vegans, but they all eat real foods, real whole foods, about 90% plant-based. No exceptions. Here's the Okinawans are particularly interesting. The Okinawa elder diet, so 70% of their calories came from sweet potatoes, 12% from rice, and 7% from grains. They were eating, and then 6% from soy. So they were eating approximately 85% of their calories were coming from complex carbohydrates or starches. Astounding, almost 85%. And you can see they weren't vegan. They got some pork, about 1% from pork, 1% from eggs, 1% from dairy, and 1% for fish. And so they were a 96% vegan diet, and almost no processed foods whatsoever. And very little oil, only 2% of the calories from oil. The Seventh-day Adventists, again, the Seventh-day Adventists are a religious group that is very focused on health. It's part, they believe, their interpretation of the Bible is that God wants us to eat extremely, mostly plant-based diets, and wants us to be very healthy. So what's so interesting about that, these people don't smoke, they don't drink, they have they have people of faith, they have religion, they have community, and so they're perfect to do a study on diet, because that's where they vary. So they had you can see from body mass index, the vegans had the lowest body mass index, followed by the vegetarians, and the omnivores were much higher. The omnivores at 28.8%, 30% or 30.0 gets you to obesity levels. Anything above 24 is overweight. So only the vegans were actually under, or at kind of an ideal weight. But the vegan Adventists who ate nuts and seeds, exercised and not smoked, they are the longest lived cohort we've ever discovered in modern times. And the men on average live 14 years longer than the average Caucasian American, and the females live 10 years longer. And look at those risk rates: 60% lower risk of cancer, 76% lower risk of heart disease, and even women, 98% lower rates of heart disease in the Adventist communities that were the vegans. It's phenomenal statistics. And I think one of my friends, Dr. Garth Davis, said, if everyone ate like an Adventist, everyone would have the same health outcomes. So Dean Ornish proved the cure for heart disease, because he did a study, and it was eating a vegetarian diet, very low in fat, very high in starches, 70-75% from starches. And the outcomes were extraordinary. He was able to reverse heart disease. So here's a guy who reversed heart disease, who cured heart disease, and nobody cares. The whole heart industry is all about cracking people's chest open and going in and doing angioplasty or doing stents, doing some kind of heroic technological intervention, when they never needed to have that kind of surgery, that through diet they could completely reverse their heart disease, and yet nobody cares, nobody seems to know about it. That's been followed up by the incredible work of Caldwell Esselstyn, who did his own work where he had people, he was much smaller cohort than Ornish worked with, but here's a diet, a very pure diet, a very 100% plant-based, no oils, no sugars, no refined carbohydrates, and it was a starch-based diet, very low in fat. And the statistics are phenomenal. These are people that were already had advanced cardiovascular disease. So 89% of his patients actually adhered to the diet, and 11% who didn't. Those who adhered to it, only 0.6%, one person, experienced a coronary event in the 3 years that followed this. These were people that mostly had already had heart attacks. And 11% of the patients were non-adherent. 62% of them had some type of coronary event in those 3 years. Phenomenal success. Nutrient density. Nutrient density, our society is obsessed with the macronutrients. How much protein should people eat? How many carbohydrates should people eat? And how much fat should they eat? Which is good? Carbs are bad, protein's good, fat we used to think is bad, and now people think it's good. And that's what most of these dietary debates are around. And they're kind of stupid debates, because if you're eating whole foods, mostly plants, you're going to get the right mix of macronutrients. What's usually left out of the discussion are the micronutrients. And these are obviously the most important nutrients from a longevity and health standpoint. And so that's the vitamins and minerals and the phytochemicals, the phytonutrients. There's estimated that there's over 10,000 phytonutrients that we've now discovered that have healthful effects on our bodies. And the foods that are the most nutrient-dense foods, I hope this one came out, based on a nutrient density per calorie, I don't know, can you read that? Probably can't, but at the very bottom, the least nutrient-dense foods you can eat are oil and refined sugars, followed by refined grains, and then cheese, and then full-fat dairy, then red meat, then eggs. We move up to all the different meat products, with fish having the most micronutrient density per calorie. And then the most nutrient-dense foods you can eat, not surprisingly, are vegetables, particularly leafy greens. Those are like the superfoods, things like kale and watercress and collards, mustard greens, these type of foods, and spinach. These are like super nutritionally dense foods on a per calorie basis. And all the vegetables and the fruits, the beans, the whole grains, nuts and seeds. So what Furman argues, Dr. Joel Furman argues, is that in his system, the key to health is to maximize your micronutrient density per calorie consumed. Health is equal to micronutrients divided by calories. So he's arguing that we should be eating an intensely micronutrient dense diet, which means lots of fruits and vegetables. Let's talk a bit about low carb diets. I call the low carb diets the zombies of the food, because they never die. You kill them, and then another generation comes along and embraces it. So these have all been bestsellers: the Atkins program, the South Beach diet, which is the best-selling diet book of all time, the Zone. Mark Hyman now is popularizing this stuff, the paleo and the primal diets. You can lose weight on these diets if you are being conscious of your portion control. And there's one great saving grace of the low-carb diets. You stop eating the highly processed grains. You stop eating the sugar. And by the way, if you just cut out sugar and highly processed grains, I guarantee you're going to feel better. The problem is that we haven't evolved that way. We've evolved as plant eaters. If you look at our nearest, not only did we evolve that way as in our Paleolithic times, but if you go back even evolutionary further back to our closest primate cousins, the gorillas, who are 100% plant-based, where we share about 98% of the DNA, and the chimps and the bonobos were closer to 99%. The gorillas are 100% plant-based, and the bonobos and the chimps are about 95% plant-based. And they're eating high quantities of nutrient-dense foliage, lots of greens. That's what they eat. They eat tons of greens, tons of fruits, and tons of veggies. So plant eaters, if you're going to be a plant eater, you're necessarily going to be a high carb eater, because carbohydrates, that's where they are. Carbs are in the plants. They're not in the animal foods. So when we talk about a low-carb diet, let's translate that. Low-carb diet means a low plant diet and a high animal foods diet. And eating high quantities of animal foods correlates very closely. It's been shown in study after study after study after study that it correlates very closely with heart disease, stroke, and cancer. And all the low-carb diet is going to inherently be very high in calories and very low in nutrient density. So it's good to minimize all the simple sugars, but then they throw out the healthy carbs, the healthy starches. And starch foods such as yams, whole grains, winter squashes, they are super healthy foods for us. These, all historical civilizations, as I've already argued, base their diet primarily on eating starch foods. Paleo. Paleo is the hottest trend at Whole Foods Market. I will tell you this right now. Paleo, you put paleo on something, you can triple its sales. Just, you know, everybody's out there. Avoid carbs. Eat protein. Eat the paleo diet. And there's some good things about it, similar to what we talked about with the low-carb diets, which paleo is a type of low-carb diet. No processed carbs, a sugar and white flour. Also, if you're truly a paleo adherent, you're not going to eat dairy products, because the ideology believes that, well, when we were in the Paleolithic times, nobody was drinking the milk from another mammal. That came later with agriculture. And eating lots of fresh fruits and vegetables. A typical good paleo diet is going to have a plate full of veggies, and it's going to have some lean grass-fed beef or some pasture-raised lamb or chicken or something like that. However, the bad part is they've cut out all the healthy carbs. They've cut out the beans. They've cut out the whole grains. A lot of times they cut out the healthy starch foods, starchy vegetables like sweet potatoes. And that results in too much animal foods and protein. And the ugly part of that is, as I've already stated, and I showed you some studies, the long-term risk for heart disease and cancer are very high with the lag period of 20 to 30 years before the symptoms really manifest. Let me talk a little bit about what Whole Foods is doing. So our company doesn't really believe the government, the medical establishment, our universities, or the food industry are going to work towards solving this problem. They have the vested interest of the food. The consumer packaged companies that are selling all the junk packaged foods are very high. They make massive quantities of money. The dairy industry, the meat industry, the egg industry, these guys fund their own kind of junk studies. They confuse everybody by putting out data, so people think, they read about the contradictory information, and it's like, gosh, you know, it's all so confusing. I don't understand it. In fact, a survey I read recently showed that for the average American, they'd rather do their own taxes than figure out how to try to eat healthier, because taxes are simpler to figure out. So what we've decided at Whole Foods, that part of our mission has got to be to help people, to make people more conscious about healthy eating. That's the real reason I wrote the book, and I'll talk more about that in just a second. So we're very focused as a company in raising the consciousness of our team members at Whole Foods to eat healthier. We've got about 90,000 people working for us, and this is a big part of what Whole Foods is about at this point. So one thing we do, if you work for our company, you automatically get a 20% discount for everything we sell. However, we have 4 different levels that you can get to based on how healthy you are. So you get a 22, 25, 27, up to platinum at 30%. And to make it simple and not too expensive, we just have 4 criteria that we measure. If you smoke, you can't get an extra discount. And then blood pressure, your total cholesterol, or your LDL, whichever's better of the two, and then your body mass index, or if you're a bodybuilder, you can also use the waist to height ratio. And then you see how people score, and then that determines what your discount is. So we had 11,000 team members, almost 12,000 participate in 16, about 8,000 qualify for a higher level discount card. And that saves our company. It's a win-win-win strategy, because not only are our team members healthier as a result of this incentive, but they save us a lot. We're self-insured, and I'm probably Google self-insured as well. So company doesn't pay anything for my health care. I never get sick. So if all of our team members ate as healthy as I did, our healthcare, we spend over $200 million a year in healthcare for our team members. Arguably, if everybody ate really healthily, well, it would plunge like 90%. So it's very much in the company's best interest to have our team members be healthy as possible. Now, obviously, it's in their best interest to be as healthy as possible. So what we do is, I've heard criticism of our discount program because it says, like, well, you're favoring the healthy people, and you're punishing the people who need it the most. Kind of that Marxist argument of need should triumph. So we have another program we call the Total Health Immersion program. This one is the one that inspired me to write the book, because we've now sent over 4,000 of our team members, or this is 3,400, but it's not updated. We've now sent over 4,000 team members through this program since we launched it in 2009. It's a one-week program. Costs us about $4,000 a team member to send somebody through the program, medically supervised. For 1 week, we completely control their food. We do intensive education about healthy eating and healthy lifestyle. We put them on an exercise program. We take all their biometrics when they walk in, get their blood. We meet with the medical doctor, and a week later, we do it all over on their way out. And even in 1 week, people can make astounding progress. It's amazing. These are the average results, where cholesterol drops 24 points, triglycerides 24, BMI drops, blood pressure drops, and people lose weight in just a week. Through this program, our company's reversed type 2 diabetes for hundreds of people. We have reversed heart disease for many, many people. And I've seen hundreds of people lose over 100 pounds of weight in a little less than a year or a little over a year. Here's a typical guy. This was a store team leader in Sacramento area. 9 months, he was type 2 diabetic. He reversed it very quickly. He lost over 90 pounds. His blood pressure dropped from 156 over 96 to 115 over 75. And he was diabetic, and his blood sugar is between 70 and 80, which is an excellent score, better than mine. Here's another guy. This guy lives in the Bay Area. No, he lives in Colorado. And this guy, I mean, he's now lost over 100 pounds in the last 12 months. He's not dropped all his medications. He actually wrote a book called The Change because he was so pumped up about this. And I think he's left the company. I think he's now like a permanent kind of a biggest loser promoter. So let me conclude, and then I'll take questions. So our country is overweight and unhealthy. And here's the thing, it's completely reversible. We can reverse it through diet and lifestyle. We each of us have the potential to probably live to be 100. Now I know Google's going to figure out some technological innovations that will help us to live past 100. And maybe, you know, the joke I say is that by the time I get to be 100, they're going to figure out how to keep me alive forever at the age 100. But truthfully, the degenerative diseases that are killing everybody, heart disease, cancer, and diabetes, are primarily dietary and lifestyle diseases. 80% of what we spend on healthcare goes to treat these diseases that we shouldn't even get. So my final message is that each of us is being called to embark on a hero's journey here in health. First, you have to wake up. You have to become conscious. You have to change the way you eat. You have to change your lifestyle. And then you're in a position to go help other people. I actually wrote this book because I've seen my own health transformed. I've seen hundreds, and perhaps at this point thousands of people in my own company transform their health. And I felt an ethical compunction to try to share what I've learned. Hence why I'm with you today. And thank you very much. I'll take a few questions.
Here at Google, we're actually very fortunate to be able to take advantage of pretty much any dietary choice that we want to. We're very fortunate to be given great food and nutritious food every day. But for the average American, the diet that you've described would actually be very cost prohibitive. And so how can we address that?
Because it's not true. That is a myth that's put out there consistently. But if you're eating the kind of diet we described in the Whole Foods diet, which is primarily a starch-based diet, so you're going to be eating a lot of brown rice, you're going to be eating beans, you're going to be eating quinoa, you're going to be eating potatoes and sweet potatoes and starchy vegetables. Those are very inexpensive foods. But you have to know how to cook. But if you know how to cook, and it's not that hard to cook brown rice, I will tell you, then you've gotten your major calories from that source. If you're just buying vegetables that are in season and a little bit of fruit that's in season, I'm telling you, you're living on, you can live on that type of diet for just, one person can live on that type of diet for about $2 or $3 a day. And the ironical thing is, I'm a really wealthy guy, but I spend almost nothing on food. I cook, I eat a really healthy diet, I don't spend very much money, even though I do get a high discount from Whole Foods. So that's the unspoken truth here, is that it looks like all that crappy junk food is inexpensive, the burgers and french fries and stuff like that. But not only would I argue that the diet I just described is less expensive, but I'll make two other points. The first one is, it may be less expensive on a per calorie basis, but on a per nutrient basis, that's an incredibly expensive diet that the average American eats, because they're not getting any nutrients. They're not getting any micronutrient density. They're just getting calories. They're getting fat, they're staying alive for a while before these lifestyle diseases take their toll and you get older. But that diet that seems inexpensive is really very expensive. And then when you add the health cost into it, what you're going to be spending on health care, as you try to deal with the diseases you get from it, it's prohibitively expensive. The diet everybody thinks is inexpensive is far more expensive than our society can afford to pay for, because health care is well on the way to bankrupting us. Next question.
It seems like there's two sort of actionable items or like action steps that you're discussing. One is just plain awareness. Most Americans don't know that like the sort of default food that you're eating is just not good. And like in this room, as you mentioned earlier, we're not very representative of that group. And then there's the secondary action of sort of once you're aware that you should be eating healthy or that the default food is not healthy, you want to optimize for that. So for people in this room, we're probably looking at number 2, but what are some actionable items that we can take to get most people to step number 1?
I mean, the most important thing we can do, obviously, is we lead by example. That's the most important thing we can do. And secondly, we influence our friends and families. And I mean, even today, I had some meetings earlier on at Google, and I had some lunch. And one of your executives at Google is on our board of directors at Whole Foods, and it's like they went to great trouble to just try to feed me, because they were like very awkward. What's this guy going to eat? So he doesn't eat oil. He doesn't want any. He's vegan, and so it was very difficult. But you know what? The food was fantastic. So, I mean, Whole Foods is doing some stuff. But we've got a program we have 3 foundations, and one foundation is aimed towards kids. One is about ending poverty, so we have a microcredit loan program that's in like 70 countries now, but that's not relevant to here. But we also have a foundation called the Whole Kids Foundation, where we give free salad bars and free gardens, school gardens, to any school in America that asks for one. So we've given out over 5,000 salad bars and almost 4,000 gardens in the school districts. And so we're getting fresh fruits and vegetables to kids. And when kids grow vegetables, kids that grow vegetables eat vegetables. So we're doing that. And then we also have a foundation called Whole Cities Foundation, where we're doing intensive education in the inner cities. And we've opened 4 stores in the inner cities that don't meet our normal prototype, one in Detroit, one in Chicago, one in Newark, New Jersey, and one in New Orleans. And 3 of those 4 stores are actually successful stores for us. So there are many things that we can do, but it's partly raising people's consciousness. But the problem is there are very powerful economic interests who don't want people to stop eating the food that they, we have this predisposition to be addicted to calorie-dense foods. And that's the biggest problem. We're a bunch of addicts. And until we have consciousness about, they say an alcoholic or a drug addict can't really begin to reform until they hit bottom. Well, many people, it's unfortunately true, it's the same way with food. And hitting bottom oftentimes means getting a disease. When I was on the tour a week or so ago, and I spoke at Goldman Sachs, I had a 23-year-old woman come up and told me this Whole Foods Market saved her life. And I said, well, how's that? She says, I got this really weird disease, and I just started eating nothing but vegan, plant-based, organic, lots of fruits and vegetables, and I reversed the disease, and I'm so grateful. And I hear that when I travel around to our stores, because I have so many team members come up that went through the Total Health Immersion and say, you saved my life. I mean, look at me. They show me the before pictures, they show me the after pictures, and it's astounding. So there's a lot of things we can do, but I can't figure it all out. Here's the good news. How old are you?
28.
28. I'm 63. Okay. I've done a lot of stuff. You're 28. You figure it out. I'll put the challenge back to you. You guys are a highly creative organization, so get to work. Next question.
First of all, thank you for the large quantity of plant-based foods at Whole Foods. That was definitely made it very easy for me to become vegan, and it's definitely cheaper than what I was eating before, and I feel a lot healthier.
So you're buying the doesn't have to be expensive argument?
Yes, it is definitely like much cheaper also, yeah. If you think about like 1 pound of sweet potatoes, it's like $1.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But so when you talk about the 90% plus calories coming from plant-based foods, I guess my question is like, you know, like I see that in the book, but I don't really see that in Whole Foods stores. And I understand that like if you're having like third-party suppliers, for example, processed foods and all of that, might be really hard to actually get 90% of your food in the store should be plant-based. But then when you have like foods that are, for example, the pastries at Whole Foods or different foods that are catered there, do you have a plan to move to 90% of it being plant-based, not only for like the health
aspect? Yeah, I wrote a book about it. But I mean, let me answer your question. So I know your question.
Yeah.
So the very first store I opened before Whole Foods Market was called Safer Way. I opened that in 1978, and it was a vegetarian store. It sold no meat. It sold no sugar. It sold no white flour. It sold no alcohol. It sold no coffee. It was an incredibly healthy store, and it did almost no business. It wasn't until we relocated that store and began to sell the foods that people wanted to buy that we had a business. And it was still a natural food, or primarily organic orientated store, but we did sell meat, natural meat, organic meat. We began to sell beer and wine and coffee, and we sold some things with sugar, and we sold some white flour, and the store was a huge success. So the ultimate answer is Whole Foods, like every other business person, has to meet the market where it finds it. And we have the highest standards. I challenge you to find any other chain of stores that has as high nutritional standards as Whole Foods has. Nobody does. Yet it's not the ideal scenario in terms of people's health because people keep making bad choices. And we have to serve the customers or they're going to go down the street to get what they want to get. So I hear what you're saying, but I'm not sure what to do about it except try to convince people to vote those products out of existence.
Yeah.
I spoke last night in Palo Alto at the Commonwealth Club, and I had animal rights activists that were disrupting the event, accusing me of killing all these animals, and it's like, guys, I don't want to kill any animals. I don't eat them. I encourage you not to eat them, but we're in business. We have to serve the market as we find it. So, and that's true for all the foods that we sell. All I can try to do is educate and persuade. Ultimately, you make the choices. And if you don't choose the meat, and you don't choose the sugar and the refined products, then we'll stop selling them.
So can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so when you're talking about standards, so I guess like, I'm actually familiar with the disruption that happened yesterday because I have 4 of my
You look familiar. You were the guy that we dragged out at about 7:32?
I was not there yesterday.
Okay.
I also don't directly support that disruption whatsoever. I just understand what.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, but I have 4 housemates, and including my boyfriend, they have done investigations into Whole Foods farms that claim to be humane and
we never claim
cage-free.
We never claim any of our things to be humane.
Yeah.
We just rate them based on the animal welfare. It's a 5-step program.
Yeah.
So we're not making a claim that it's humane. We're just saying there are different gradations of the way the animals are treated. Here's the thing. Is Whole Foods system perfect? No, of course not. We can't monitor these farms 24/7. They have to pass certain inspections and tests, and we do flunk them out. Really bad actors do get investigated and tossed out. So all I can say is we're the ones being attacked, and yet we're the only ones that are trying to do anything about it. Who else? Do you think Safeway is doing anything about it? Do you think Trader Joe's still has caged eggs, for God's sake? I mean, we don't have any. We haven't had any caged eggs for almost 20 years. We're the only ones that are trying to make a difference. They're trying to get a higher, more ethical source of animal foods. And we're the only ones being attacked. And we're being attacked by the people that should be making common cause with us. They're not out there picketing Safeway. They're not out there picketing Trader Joe's. They're picketing the only company that's trying to make it better. I just think that's incredibly weird.
So they actually have just done protests for Sprouts, Safeway, and Trader Joe's. So
go get them!
Yeah. But so do you believe that there is like an ethical way of killing animals or like harvesting milk?
No, I mean, you need to read chapter 13 of the book. You should read that chapter first. I make the ethical argument. The book argues for 10% animal foods based on the science. We don't see that eating up to 10% you're going to get any worse health outcomes. In chapter 13, I make the very impassioned ethical case for not eating any animal foods. Read that chapter and tell me if you don't see that I'm actually on your side. I'm not the enemy. I'm a pragmatist.
No, I agree.
I'm a pragmatist trying to make the world a better place. But you have to meet the world where you find it. It's easy to be holy and pure and not make a difference in the world.
Sounds great. Cool.
Okay.
Thank you.
Chapter 13. Check it out. Let me know what you think.
Yes. Cool. Thank you.
All right.
My wife and I recently have transferred over to being fully vegan, plant-based, and it's been somewhat of a process. Kind of cutting out red meat.
Yeah.
Vegetarian.
Journey. I get it.
Yeah, and as the education builds, you start to make better choices. So I'm just kind of curious how that path for you was. Was it gradual? Was there a wow moment?
Yeah, several wow moments. In my case, it followed through certain stages. The first one was when I was 23 years old, and I moved into a vegetarian co-op in Austin, where I live. I wasn't a vegetarian, but I just thought I'd meet some really cool people that were vegetarians. And that was a very radical thing back in 1975, to be a vegetarian. And I went in, I became a vegetarian, and my food consciousness was awakened. When I went there, it changed my life. I'd found my higher purpose in life, although I didn't know it at the time. I became the food buyer for the co-op. I just read so many books about it. I was totally in love with the whole idea of natural and organic. And pretty soon after that, I started Saferway, and with my girlfriend that I met at that co-op. So that was the first awakening. And then the second awakening was back in 2003 when Whole Foods we were at an annual meeting, and we were disrupted by animal activists who were very upset about a duck we were selling that they said was from a factory farm. And to make a long story short, I ended up in a dialogue with one of the activists, and we swapped emails and we began a dialogue. And after about a month or so, we were both getting frustrated with each other, and she sent me an email and she said, Mr. Mackey, I can see that you're a very idealistic man, you really want to make the world a better place. But when it comes to livestock animals, you have no idea what you're talking about. You're grossly not well informed. So I took that. I was taken aback, but I decided, she's probably right. So then I read, that summer of 2003, I read, a dozen books on the way we raise food in America, particularly animal foods. And I was like freaked out. It was terrible. I had no idea. It was so horrible. It was a nightmare. And by the time that I'd read about 4 or 5 books, I decided I'm going to have to become a vegan. I can't in good conscience eat this stuff. And so I did. That was a huge awakening for me. And I also vowed at that point Whole Foods would do what it could to improve animal welfare, and that would resulted in our 5-step animal welfare process that he has friends that are unhappy with it. And then my health got better. But then the next big breakthrough was like in 2006 when I read the China study by Colin Campbell. And that was like such an awakening, because I really didn't stop ending the processed foods. The real kind of, when I became a vegan, I was like a junk food vegan. So when I got rid of the processed foods, my health became unbelievable. I weigh the same right now as I weighed when I was 18 years old. My cholesterol is like 135, 140. My blood pressure is 105 over 65, something like that. I almost never get sick. My immune system's super strong. My telomeres are like in the 98th percentile. It's the diet and lifestyle. And so those 3 separate events, wish I'd gotten it when I was in my early 20s, but I didn't. I only got part of it when I was 23. I had to pick up the rest as I got older. So good luck to you.
Yeah, I was curious what the role of the preparation method of the food is in the whole foods diet, and the role of fats. When I think of even cooking healthy vegetable things, I think of I put a little oil on it for salad dressing, or oil to grill it or roast it. Or is cooking or not cooking it a dimension, and what kind of fats, if any, would be acceptable?
Well, in the diet, we again don't make a big deal out of protein, fat, and carbohydrates. We consider that to be misleading to people. If you eat a whole foods diet, mostly plants, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. You're going to get enough protein, you're going to get enough carbs, you're going to get enough fat. So, but you are using oil to cook, and we do argue against oil in the book. You don't need any, you never need to eat oil. You don't need to cook with it. When I steam fry my veggies, and it's easy to do. You just do it with water or vegetable broth, or even a little wine, which alcohol will evaporate off. So you don't need that to saute. And if you're talking about fats to add some kind of sauce to make, say, put on the veggies and stuff, it's so easy if you get a high-powered blender like a Vitamix or a Blendtec or even a little NutriBullet. You can make, you just mix some nuts and seeds. I mean, a simple way to do it is some kind of nut or seed, a little bit of some kind of vinegar or lemon juice, and fat and acid, and then either you go savory with like garlic and mustard or something like that, or you go sweet by just throwing like blueberries or blackberries into it, or cherries, and you'll get the most delicious sauces you can possibly imagine. And so typical dinner for me, for example, is cook a sweet potato, steam up a big plate of veggies, make up some kind of little nut dressing, and put that on the veggies, and voila, it takes me 10 minutes to cook dinner. Or after you, well, sweet potato, you got to bake that or steam it. But that takes very little time. It's not expensive at all. It's delicious, and it's incredibly nutritious, and it couldn't be easier. But so I get my fats from the whole foods, avocados, nuts and seeds, primarily are the concentrated sources. But what people don't realize, fats they're in everything. You can't possibly not get enough fat. I mean, if I had steel-cut oats for breakfast, and oats are 13% fat, and just regular oats, I mean, fats they're just there. And it's like something to worry about.
Thank you.
Guys, thanks very much. Good luck at Google. Keep changing the world.